I am excited and honored and probably a little nervous to be here today with Professor Sean Carroll. Professor Carroll is not only one of the world's most eminent theoretical physicists, but also the best-selling author of popular science titles, including From Eternity to Here and The Big Picture. Professor Carroll, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks very much for having me.
So I am a newbie to the field of writing, but I have an upcoming book called How Life Got This Way. And I hope that's a self-explanatory title, but it breaks history down into powers of 10 years. I'm interested in truth as well as the pursuit of truth and how it shapes the human experience. And I feel that you have very similar interests, and I'm really interested in talking to you in three capacities today. First, as an expert on what I call the chapter 10 timescale, 10 to the 10 years. Also, as a participant in the scientific revolution of the last few centuries and millennia, which are what I call the chapters 2 and 3 timescales. And finally, as a contemporary author. So, if you don't mind, I would like to actually begin this discussion on the topic of research and writing. So, let's open with sort of a grandiose question. Why should we care about events that happened thousands, millions, or billions of years ago in a world that's so large that we can't even keep track of what's going on today? Isn't there enough to deal with in the present?
Well, you don't have to care. I can't force you to care if you don't. But I think most people are able and interested in caring about more than one thing at a time. Sure, there's plenty of things going on in the present that require an extraordinary amount of effort and attention. But making the world a better place requires understanding it better. It requires understanding not only the present, but also the past and predicting into the future. And that's what scientists and intellectuals more broadly are all about. And I feel it's what people are all about. I think that people are naturally curious. We want to do more than just survive from day to day. We care about understanding the world. That is one of the things that drives us as human beings. And so understanding whether it's history or geology or cosmology, understanding the past is part of the activity that brings meaning to our lives.
We live in a total information age, information overload age. Let's call it the Google age. What place is there anymore for authors and books when anybody can just go online and find all the answers at their fingertips?
Well, I think that there's a place for a diverse ecosystem of ways to find information. It's true that you can find information in some very broad sense all over the place. But what kind of information and for what purposes are you going to use it? There's some things can be fitted into a tweet. Some things can be put into a nice blog post or a web page or something like that. But for some insights, you need a book. You need a book-length treatment. And the way to deliver that book-length treatment, whether it's through a physical hard copy book or an audio book or something that is electronic, I don't care. I don't really care about that. What I care about is that some topics require sustained engagement, the gradual development of an argument, building things up piece by piece so you can explore the connections between them in ways that you just can't in a 1,000-word article online.
Let's talk about academics, specialists, and generalists. And as a clear caveat here, I'm not an academic myself, but in my perception, academics of today are very, very specialized in their fields of pursuit. And I can completely understand that. The benefits of specialization are very obvious to me. But I'd like to just take a moment and think about the costs of an academic field that is just all specialists all the time. Do you feel that we need generalists, and what role can or do they play in today's academic environment?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, I completely agree with you that specialization has its obvious benefits, but it's not the only way to get good results academically. And even if it's the best way, I think there's a mistake that academia can make in saying, well, this is the best way, therefore let's only do this. Because even if it's the best way for some problems, it's not always the best way for every problem. There's a place for being a generalist, for drawing connections between different fields, for thinking interdisciplinary ways. And furthermore, just for people who are specialists to talk to each other in interdisciplinary ways. So I think that a healthy ecosystem doesn't just have one kind of plant or animal. You have lots of different kind of niches that are played by different people, different animals in the analogy that I was just talking about. And for academia, that would include a bunch of hyper specialists, a bunch of generalists, a bunch of people who are specialists in some sense, but what their specialty is doesn't fit neatly into the academic classification system that we know and love so much. And they should all be able to talk to each other when they want to. That should be an easy thing to do rather than a hard thing to do.
When I watch science fiction movies, that's always like what the cast of characters is. Jurassic
Yeah,
Park.
there's experts in different areas, right?
Right. You specialize in modern physics, quantum mechanics, and cosmology. I was really drawn to your book, The Big Picture, in which you wrote quite at length about topics in chemistry, biology, psychology, and philosophy. I'm curious what drew you to these subjects, and especially what has drawn you to writing popular books, including a book on themes of life and meaning.
Well, I think these things are important. And I've always been someone, ever since I started becoming intellectually interested in the world, who wanted to look beyond any one narrow specialization. I really do deeply feel that even if human beings are benefited by specializing, the universe of knowledge is not broken up into actual specialties. It blends together, and there's sort of different questions you can ask in different ways, and that's a useful thing to do. For the big picture in particular, what I was interested in was explaining how the world might be natural, that is to say, not supernatural. Mm-hmm. That is to say, the fundamental principles of reality are laws of physics that sort of play themselves out in different ways. They play out in some ways at the level of particle physics or atomic physics or chemistry, but then another way at the level of biology and sociology and psychology and people talking to each other. And there's yet another set of questions to ask about meaningfulness and purpose and morality and ethics. And the question is, how can all of this vast array of human experience fit into this framework of naturalism? And for some of that, we don't know the answer. We don't know the once and for all answers about what is the origin of life, what is the meaning of life, things like that. But we can still ask, is it plausible that a natural world suffices to answer those questions? And I wanted to say yes. And if I was going to say yes in a comprehensive way, that meant diving into a lot of different areas of research that I'm not an expert in, but I got to talk to some real experts along the way.
Well, I think it's a very important and fascinating discussion that really has been going on since at least Descartes and Leibniz. And you describe your theme as poetic naturalism. When I read that book, I was really reminded of The Grand Design by Hawking and Moldenau. I don't remember if they used that same term, but they also described reality on different levels that must intersect but cannot necessarily be derived from each other.
Yeah, I think it's an obvious feature of the real world is that it presents itself to us in different ways at different levels. You know, the table that is in front of me right now is a table. I'm someone who believes that tables exist. There's some very advanced philosophers who would question that, but I think that tables exist. I think this table right here exists, and I can talk about it. It has a concrete top and metal legs, and it has a certain solidity and weight and a certain color and things like that. All that makes sense. But I know that it's also made of atoms, right? And those atoms are arranged into molecules. I could also talk about the table in the language of atoms, how many atoms there are, what different forms they have, how they fit together. That's a perfectly legitimate way of talking. And to say that one way of talking is correct doesn't invalidate the other ways of talking. At other levels, I could talk about going deeper, the quantum wave function of the table, or going higher and more abstract, the role that the table plays in this dining room, right? It is a place to sit down and eat. It holds plates and things like that. I can put my computer on it to do video interviews. There's a whole bunch of different vocabularies we can use. We could even go aesthetic, right? Is it a good looking table? Is it functional for these purposes? Does it bring me pleasure to sit down at it? And all of these need to be consistent, need to be compatible with each other. It's not that one necessarily defines the other. You can't necessarily tell me whether the table is beautiful or not just by telling me about its atoms, but it better be compatible. The atoms better not be arranged in such a way that it can't possibly be a beautiful table.
Yeah, and what kind of fascinates me is that these different ways of talking don't only tell us about the table, but they also tell us a lot about people and how we think and how we need to model things.
Well, it tells us both about people and about the natural world. You know, when we talk about the table as a table, not as a collection of atoms, we're ignoring a bunch of information, right? We don't care about the specific locations of each atom or each elementary particle in the table. And we can get away with that. That's the amazing thing. The amazing thing is, even though we're giving a very, very incomplete description of what's going on in the table, the description we do give turns out to be incredibly useful. That's the miraculous fact about all these layers of reality, that we can, if we want to, speak of them in independent and autonomous ways.
I've always been a fan of popular science ever since I was a teenager, and I sort of distinguish popular science authors into a few different categories. Some popular science authors are specialists in their fields. Stephen Hawking would be, the premier example of that. There are other authors who are academics but write in fields that are not necessarily their own home base. Jared Diamond and David Christian are two really good examples of those. And then some authors are not academics at all, and I might mention Malcolm Gladwell, James Gleick, or Michael Shermer. But some of these non-specialist authors are highly successful or influential. What strengths do you feel that a non-specialist writer can bring to an informative book for a general audience?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is there's kind of a responsibility to get ideas across, whether or not those ideas are invented by people who are good communicators. As important as I think communication is, I'm the first to recognize that some of my scientific friends and colleagues aren't very good at it. And I don't demand that they do it. I don't think there's any responsibility of every single academic to be out there talking to the world if it's just not their skill set, and that's not going to help anybody. But they might be doing really interesting work, and as a result, there is absolutely a role to be played by people who are willing to put in the effort to understand their work and then to explain it to the rest of the world. That's a crucially important thing. The other thing is that there are connections that can be drawn by people who are outsiders, right? There's people who can have a perspective, can really dig into a topic from a different angle than a professional academic might want to dig into it. And, humanize it, tell stories about it, all sorts of things that are not valued or rewarded in the academic context might be treated differently in a context of writing and journalism and reporting. So I'm very, very happy that there's a broad ecosystem of people who are specialists, generalists, and outsiders who are interested and can communicate about it.